Okay. It's 2 o'clock. Welcome everyone to this seminar on gender equality in academia. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Paul Walton from University of York, coming here to give a seminar on this important topic. It's a field where we are discussing a lot, of course, at Chalmers, as I guess at most universities around the world, and where we know we have challenges and we need to move forward. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Paul. Paul obtained his PhD in 1990. He followed by 2 years as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of California, Berkeley. And he joined the Department of Chemistry at York University as a faculty member in 1993. He was also chairman of the department between 2004 and 2010. Paul's research field is bioinorganic chemistry, but he's also become very much internationally known for his work on equality issues in academia. And he has many talks and missions in this area, including serving on review groups in several countries, and has gained a lot of experience, of course, in the field. So Paul, we look forward to listen to you and see what you have to tell us and having a discussion with you. So welcome here.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you. It's Was it really 1990 I did my PhD? I felt very old as you said that. Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to give a talk about gender equality from the perspective of the gender equality work we've been doing over 25 years at the University of York in England. A few things to say before I start, though. First of all, I don't mind if you have questions during my talk, just to stick out your hand or shout out the question. Please feel free to do that. That often leads to an interesting debate during the talk, although there'll be time to ask questions at the end. The second thing is that I'll talk about what we've done at York, but in many cases, a lot of the practice goes on elsewhere, and I'll share with you where some of the stories associated with the practice. My aim is to equip you with the things that we have found work, and they also work in conjunction with being a research active university that does teaching as well, but is at the forefront of research thinking, just like Chalmers, in other words. All the gender equality work always has at its heart academic and, in my case, scientific excellence, so that's not compromised. There's one plea, though, just one plea. If there's one thing you remember today, please remember this, is that we have learned over all these years of doing gender equality work that the thing that makes the difference is when you bring to bear the evidence base about gender equality, rather than anecdotes and stories and experiences, that you bring to bear what is known about gender equality into your thinking. And that is particularly important at a university level, is to use the evidence base. And I'll refer to those words again and again: evidence base, evidence base, evidence base. And to put it another way around, we've learned to hug a social scientist at York and be nice to them, because often they have got some of the secrets and some of the understanding about what causes gender equality that is often absent from our thinking. And so, like I say, if there's one thing you remember, please think about using social scientists and social scientist research to guide your thinking. Okay, right, so here we go. Oh, the other thing to say, yes, as Stefan said, I've given this talk now, it's about 100 times across the world, and I've learned the best way to kind of present the data is to go through what have been the resistances to the work that we've done. For this reason, if you pursue gender equality practice actively, you will find resistances. And being able to identify those resistances and then deal with them, we have found is one of the more effective ways forward. So I've framed this talk now into the resistances that we've encountered over the 25 years. Just something to add to that, we have found that those resistances have changed over the years. So we start in the early years, it was a particular resistance, and then there have been other resistances as we progressed. The most recent resistance has occurred in the last 12 to 18 months, and I'll share that with you. It's a very interesting resistance, and we're just kind of in the middle of dealing with it, and I'd be really interested in your comments about that. Okay, so these are the resistances. In the first instance, in the early years, people just said the following: there is no problem. And by the way, about 10% of people currently hold that opinion, regardless of where they may be. And that will be true here of Sweden too. They'll just say there isn't a problem. Some people don't even see the problem. You can have people in a room full of men, male scientists, and they won't recognize that there's a gender equality problem. I'd like to talk about how to deal with that. The second resistance, and by far and away the most difficult, and the one that's most emotionally challenging, and I have had in my talks people get angry and upset at this point, including one guy at the back, and I'm just looking very carefully at the back row here, who came down, and I wouldn't say punch me, but pushed me very hard before he departed from the lecture theatre, saying some very rude things. Just looking at your back row. And checking I can get out. And I'd like to debate that and some of the things that we've come across there, and indeed some of the more recent challenges we've faced on people saying, well, Paul, it's a woman's problem. It's a biological difference that drives the things that we see. I'll tell you the punchline right now, it's not because of biology. Another one we've got is people say, well, yes, I can see that there is a problem, and I can see actually that it's not just a male-female problem, but frankly, I've done all the training from the HR department, bless them, and I follow all the policies, follow all the procedures. I am fair. I am fair. And I'd like to debate that too. And that's a very common resistance, usually among scientists, interestingly enough. I don't quite know why that's the case. I'd like to show you that actually the decisions that are made, even against the fairest of bases, with all the policies in place, simply are not fair, and things you can do to address that. Fourth one, it isn't my problem. Why should we be interested in this? Actually, I don't think that's necessarily resistance you would find here in Sweden, because I think there's a societal acceptance that this is a problem that, if we deal with it, will actually lead to better society. I'll talk about what the evidence base is to address that. And then the last one I've called the Trump effect. This is one that's which has come up recently. Let me paraphrase that. People are now saying, it's gone too far. This gender equality business has gone too far. We've had enough. We're tired of it. And you can see why I've called it the Trump effect. It just happens to correlate with the beloved President Trump, saying essentially the same thing. And I'd like to talk about that because that has licensed quite a strong reaction. And that's quite a tricky one. Okay. So, there isn't a problem. I'll share with you some data now that you'll be familiar with, but there's some important points. These are data from the UK for the percentage of women at particular grades in universities. So undergraduate students, master's students, PhD students, research assistants, and then these are the professorial grades. They're labelled differently in the UK. So this is assistant professor, associate professor, then full professor. And this is data for all subjects at particular points in time. Now, so I've got, unhelpfully, one of the lines is in white, which is not good for you, but you can tell I'm a scientist, can't you? Hide my data. Pick the black line. Pick the black line. Black line's percentage of men at particular grades as you go from left to right. Those numbers are not quite the way right way around. At undergrad level, all subjects in UK universities, about half and half. Just men actually slightly less represented at undergraduate level than women. And there's an issue in schools in the UK about boys not training well for universities. The school system actually favours girls, and that's an interesting point of debate at the moment. So universities get a bit of that. Graduate students, it's about the same, and then of course you know what happens, this leaky pipeline plot. And I don't want to labour this. There are two things here, though, that show you that the problem is real. First of all, not only is there the drop, but that when we get to the very senior grades, so full professor here, you notice there's a particular drop, right? And the UK, the percentage of female professors is about 20% across all subjects. In Sweden, I think it's about 25%. 27%, right. 27%. Now, let me tell you this. Sweden's a far more progressive society than Britain is. So why is there is some difference, but not a significant difference between the two. And I'm going to say this too, and forgive me, and this is where I may have to escape from the room. Sweden has got gender equality problems just as the UK has, right? And we're reaching, as a society, this kind of, I call it the 25% kind of limit. We get to a particular point in all sorts of societies and institutions and organizations, not only universities, where you get to about 25% of women at the top, then it stops. Any progress stops. And the reason I can say that, if you look at the other plot, the other curves there, so there's the grey line for men and the white line for women, these are plotted on a time basis, 2000, 2010. And even though there's a small difference there, actually the small difference is no difference because it's such a small difference. Moreover, if you look at more recent data, it shows the following: the problem's not improving. We were talking over lunch about how slow things were to change. And that's absolutely right, right? The problem is not going away. The other interesting thing to say about these data is the following, is that this leaky pipeline plot, its shape, its form, is found in every single profession, in every single country, regardless of whether in universities or institutes or commerce or industry or even the positions in society. And here's my question then. If that's a universal truth, where are the women going? And indeed, where is that talent being lost? And how do we address that? And so for those people who say there isn't a problem, there is a problem. There is a problem, and it's not going away. And the data say nothing but that. And actually, within your academic cohort, including students, it's important that the data are available at every single level to make sure people are not led into a misunderstanding that there isn't a problem. These are the data plotted in different ways. Here, column plots percentage of women at particular grades. You notice I always put a time basis there, 2001-2 for the light blue columns, 2006-7 for the dark blue columns. For all subjects on the left. Don't concentrate on that though. Concentrate on the plot on the right, which is my beloved chemistry. Right? Chemistry is interesting. Chemistry's got a double problem. Chemistry not only has a low fraction of women starting the profession, the small numbers of women that we do have in the UK, we seem to get rid of. Right? There must be a place they go to which never return from. Right? 1 in 16 of UK chemistry full professors are women. 1 in 16. I mean, there are some chemistry departments you walk into, they're estrogen-free zones. There are no women at all at the top level. How can chemistry as a profession survive that? But notice there's a double problem there. It's not only the percentage of women entering the profession, but the women that enter, we lose. Got a question for you. Out of all the subjects, certainly in the UK, which is the subject which has the most even progression from junior to senior grades? Could anyone venture a guess? Computer science, you're very clever. Almost is the answer to that. It's physics and maths. Physics, yes, I can see some eyebrows going, oh, really? Yeah. Physics and maths. Physics and maths take a very small fraction of women, unacceptably small, by the way. Yeah, unacceptably small. But the women that go into that profession tend to progress relatively well. Physics is better than mathematics in this regard. What do you think is the worst subject? Chemistry is pretty bad, it's not the worst. Looking at me very expectantly now. It's clinical medicine. Clinical medicine has a precipitously large drop of women from junior to senior grades. And in fact, I don't know what goes on in medicine. There's a preponderance of women at the junior grades, and then they're culled through the system to very low fractions of the most senior grades. Why do I mention this to you? I mention this to you because of this. Different subjects have different problems and require different interventions. So in physics, the issue is not so much the culture of places, it's rebalancing the whole system, right? In chemistry, we have both problems. We have fewer women coming in, and then we get rid of them. In clinical medicine, there are plenty of women coming in, but they're getting rid of. And here's my other comment about the people who say there isn't a problem. Well, indeed, there is a problem, and but that problem changes shape depending on the particular subject you're associated with. In other words, the intervention that works in physics may not work in clinical medicine. The intervention that works in clinical medicine may not work in physics. Be savvy about the data. Next plot, though, is my favorite. The one on the right there is nursing and paramedical studies. If you work into the thought that's just come up in your head, for some of you, which is nursing and paramedical studies is not a real subject, and I can see it in your eyes, I'm not going to identify you. I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask you to suspend that thought. Why? Because in our minds, we often judge the value of a subject by what we think it's worth. And nursing and paramedical studies is near the bottom of, these are from studies, in terms of opinion. That is a form of gender bias. Suspend the thought and just accept the following. It is a perfectly bona fide subject to study academically. Perfectly. Physics, the same as physics and maths and engineering and computing science. There we go. You got that one in there. You walk into a nursing and paramedical studies department, what do you find? You find women. Lots of women, right? 80%. But look. Even in female-dominated organizations, you still see a bias against women due to progression. Against women. And, of course, it leads me to this, and you understand this. It's not a problem about women, it's not a problem about men, it's a problem of society. We had a very interesting debate over lunch and dinner last night about the societies in which we work. And the following is true, I think, in every single setting I've been in, is that women continue to carry the burden of home care and of domestic duties. They're expected to pick up the kids from school. They're expected to do the cooking. They're expected to clean the house. They're expected to make sure that little Johnny or little Sarah's got a present to take to the party down the road. Whereas men don't seem to carry that responsibility. And we work within these unfair contexts. And any progress on gender equality has at least to recognize that the context we work in is unfair. By the way, I will add to this, and I only say this in universities. As a university, our responsibility is, yes, for our own staff and our own students, but also for the societies we work in. And it's an important debate to have as whether as a university body, we should work to try and get society to think differently about the way it carries out its own business. We use statistics in the the university, to show the progression of women across the grades. I'm going to say something about statistics here. Statistics are evil things because they can mislead and give you the wrong impression. The current thinking in social science is the following, is that you need to use several sources of data from different kind of angles to address the same problem, but there is no single source of data that will give you a direct sight into gender equality problem. And so what are the two sources of data that we use? We use, yes, the leaky pipeline plots, but we also use pay. Now, pay is an interesting subject because the things that influence pay are multiple, one of which is the progression or lack of progression of women through the system, other is what rewards that women get, all of the following, right? But it is an index of gender inequality or equality in an organization. If it's used in that way, then it becomes a very powerful way to see if there's progress. These are the gender pay gaps for UK universities. Do you know what's the gender pay gap? Average pay of men, subtract the average pay of women, divided by the average pay of men. Here's the University of York, which weighs in at minus 15%. It's a misery. It's a misery. So overall, because of the differences in grades and progression, we pay our women 15% less than our men. It's not acceptable. I should say, I've spoken at 2 UK universities in the UK, where the Vice-Chancellor, the Rector's been in the audience, and 1 month after, he in both cases, equalised male and female pay. Just mention that to you. You're regretting sitting on the front row now, are you? Got a question for you. So those are all different universities in the UK. Where are the universities of Oxford and Cambridge? Can you guess? Can you guess? Yeah. It's interesting that I've asked that question in many, many different settings right around the world, and everyone gives exactly the same answer. They're down here, right? And indeed they are. And if you take the most prestigious universities in the UK, they all cluster around this crummy area down here. These are outliers down here. And it goes with this, and this is particularly important for a technological university, is that you find the biggest gender inequality in professions of prestige or institutions of prestige, right? And those are particularly vulnerable to gender inequality, actually revealed in pay gap analyses. If I was to ask you what the universities on the far right were there, well, I'll answer the question. These are small liberal art colleges in London. And if I said their name to you, you would go, where's that? And these are perhaps what you might call the least prestigious institutions, higher education institutions in the UK. So if as you are a prestigious university, and as you have a collection of prestigious subjects, you are vulnerable to particularly gender inequality. So these indices all show that there's a problem. I'd like to I will mention this at this point. This is my first kind of call to the evidence base. And I'll remind you that all the things I say are about using the evidence base. What does the evidence base say about pay and rewards? It says the following. And this is a paper that I picked out from 2015. It's the best one I can find. It says this. We found that sex differences in reward, that includes salary, bonuses, and promotion rates. And by the way, all sorts of other things. And I will mention this in a technological university, lab space, PhD students, equipment, sabbatical leave, all the bonuses that may come with being an academic, right, were 14 times larger, yes, 14 times larger than sex differences in performance evaluations. In other words, if you have a man and a woman who are of equal performance, the man is more likely, 14 out of 15 times, is likely to get a small increase in this, that, and the other compared to the woman. Why is that? We'll come back to that later, but it's there. Moreover, this one here, in highly prestigious occupations, women performed equally but rewarded as significantly lower than men. And at this point, you need to hold on to the arms of your chair when I tell you the ratio of the rewards differences is 50%. Yes, 50%. So in other words, a woman has to perform at 50% greater output than a man to achieve the same status. Yes, I can see the shock in your faces. And you hear this kind of thing that goes round. They say women have to do twice the effort than men to get the same position. It's basically true. I can see I'm disappointing my audience a little bit. But I'm doing this. I'm giving you ammunition for those people who come to you and say there isn't a problem. Every single social science base, evidence base, every single study, every single bit of data. I've not seen a bit of data that shows the opposite. Not one shows that there's a problem. And that problem is particularly vivid and acute in institutions like the ones that we work in. Oh, what are the solutions? By the way, I've put into my presentation what we found the solutions to these resistances are. The first is just complete transparency about data, pay and workloads. The greatest thing we did at York was to release the details of everyone's pay. My colleagues were as grumpy as hell about it, but when we released pay, people could see what was going on and make a commitment to reducing, for us, the pay gap over a period of time. That was a very interesting dynamic to open up with the workforce. So complete transparency, and particularly about workloads and what people are asked to do. And then all data, graduate students, promotions, appointment panels to be split into men and women, just the fractions. Just having those data available gives the debate a chance to breathe and stops people saying there isn't a problem. Okay. It's a woman's problem. And again, I'm looking at the back row here. This resistance started to occur, I would say, about 2 to 3 years into our journey. As we started to open up the problem. Oh, I should tell you how long is the journey. The journey for us has been about 20 years. 20 years. And it's important I mention that because all the data and all the evidence base says that substantive change, the minimum time you can expect substantive change is 10 years. Right? Yeah. Don't go into gender equality work thinking you can change things overnight, because if you do, then it'll collapse shortly afterwards. If you aim to make substantive change on the evidence base I'm going to present to you, then you can expect a change to happen over a period of 10 years. So after 20 years, you can expect to see progress. So we saw this resistance after about 2 or 3 years of effort. And it took us a while to figure out how to deal with it. Eventually, we got to the answer. Well, I always say part of the answer. So I have a question for you, and it's this. It's an important one. It's an important one to put to your colleagues and to have it live. And at this point, I need you to inspect deeply your own reaction to the following question. Yeah, be honest with yourself. And that is, what are the innate, the biological, the things that can't be changed, differences between men and women in the following categories? Ambition, maths ability, confidence, psychological well-being, personality, cognitive performance. Men can read maps better than women. Women can multitask better than men. And self-esteem. What are, when you do the experiment, and it's a difficult experiment to do, by the way, the psychologists and the social scientists have really wrestled with this for multiple years, and I'll tell you something just before I give you the answer. Maths ability, until quite recently, it was thought that men were biologically better at maths than women, until quite recently. The evidence base would tell you that, right? And this was at the extreme end of maths, by the way. But what's your reaction? What's your true reaction to that statement, that there are innate differences between men and women in these categories? I once wrote to there was a university. I've got a reputation in the UK of being a bit annoying, because if I see gender equality, I'll write to somebody or call it out. There was a terrible instance of gender inequality at a particular university in the UK. So I wrote to the Vice-Chancellor, who then passed it on, as they do, to the Director of HR, right? Forgive me, I'm not suggesting you would do that. The Director of HR wrote back to me. She says, "Dear Paul, thank you for your letter. Yes, we're very concerned about gender equality, but you misunderstand one thing." And I'm thinking, oh, what have I done? You know, what have I misunderstood? She says, the answer's plain. Women are less ambitious than men. Yeah, now thank you for your face at the back, which was this, by the way. Women are... But think about it for a second. Think about it. At least she was honest with me. At least she was showing me what she really thought were the reasons behind the problem. Of course, I wrote back and said, well, you know, blah, 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 blah. Never got a response. But what do you think? And what do the majority of people think? And the answer is that the majority of people will think, well, there are indeed significant differences in the way that men and women behave. We were talking over lunch about men doing housework, and about how men don't seem to recognize that the toilet needs cleaning, or the bench needs dusting, or the floor needs vacuuming. But what are the biological differences is that an explanation? Do men not recognize it at all? The answer is no. There's no difference. And in fact, my next slide, I preempted it slightly, I shouldn't have done, is that when you look, and you do the experiment, let's be clear about this, there is no difference. There isn't. And any argument that's based on the fact that there may be a biological difference is simply not true. Now, there may well be differences because we've been brought up in a way which we expect to behave in that particular way, right? And yes, now we rummage around the depths of our childhood and our parents and all of this. Of course we do. But when we come to the bottom line, when it comes to ability, and it comes to the things that we hold dear as academics, there simply isn't a difference. And anything that proceeds from the assumption that there is a difference will fail. So if your HR department runs courses on improving women's confidence, then they're likely to fail. It may address an immediate issue, but it doesn't address the issue. Let's be clear. It is not a problem of biology. It's a problem of expectation. In other words, it's not a woman's problem. Here's, I like this nowadays. You couldn't do this 20 years ago. Did the internet exist 20 years? I can't even remember. It probably just did, didn't it? 25 years ago. You could email, but you couldn't Google, that's for certain. But here's a challenge for you. You may do it on your phones now. Type into Google, causes of underrepresentation of women in, pick your favorite subject, Sweden, chemistry, physics, dustbin cleaners, I don't know. And almost certainly you will find that someone has done the study. Someone has done it for you. And my comment is this, then take the study, take the results from the study and use that as the basis of your intervention. I can't tell you how many gender equality meetings I've been to. It's now in the thousands probably, where people have sat down, and it's usually women, and I'm sorry to say that, but it's usually women. And what happens is we all share our stories. This happened to me, that happened to me, I saw this happen. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a valuable and important thing to do, but it's not a basis on which to develop policy or interventions. Use the evidence base. Use evidence base which tells you very clearly this is not a woman's problem, this is a problem of expectations, and particularly the way that we view men and women on a day-to-day basis in the workplace. Now, it's interesting, when we challenge my colleagues with that, and this is principally my academic colleagues, if I close my eyes, I can see their faces now, and they're grimacing and pulling their faces and shaking and all of this. It was clear that whilst the message was clear, it wasn't engaging people fully. And so we had to come up with some tricks on, now you'll be familiar with these words now, implicit or unconscious bias. It's quite interesting. These words, unconscious bias now, are big news in the UK. Everyone understands unconscious bias. Every university has a training course on unconscious bias. Nearly all institutions and industry have training courses on unconscious bias, in the belief that actually this is the root of where we see differences in the ability of men and women to progress through systems. And two questions come up. Are you unconsciously biased? And two, how do you control it? I'll tell you this in a second, how we did this at York, but I'll add something to this. I would say our advice on this has changed in the last 12 months, largely because of the following. I'll cut to the punchline and then tell you why. Largely because unconscious bias training does not work. And interestingly, most UK universities have put unconscious bias training in place as the antidote, the answer to gender equality, against what the evidence base is saying, which says it doesn't work. And I'll tell you why. So the question is, and I need to wave at my friend here at the back. I'm going to show you a slide. I'm going to show you a slide in a second, which is of a cat. I put this in for amusement's sake more than anything. The cat's this notion of unconscious bias is how we deal with situations instinctively, and of course a cat is an animal. Is as against cognitively, where we think about it, is happening. There we go. Thank you so much. That's perfect. Thank you. So you'll see a cat, and it's eating some food, and behind the cat we've placed a cucumber. Okay, watch the cat. I'll do it again. There we go. Watch the cat. And we'll do it a third time because it's fun. Right. So what's going on? What's going on? The cat's eating its food. The cat is unconsciously biased to recognize snakes. It doesn't process the fact that the cucumber isn't a snake quickly enough, and it reacts. It reacts. And of course, this is a somewhat inbuilt thing for the poor old cat. I should say no cats were harmed in the making of this talk. So, how did we get my colleagues to work towards that understanding? Well, we started to use these. Now, I need you to, this will be a bit like being at school, but please forgive me. Please just bear with me. Look at the dot in the middle. Look at the dot in the middle. I need you to stare quite hard at it. 5, and I'm going to change the slide in a few moments, but stare at the dot and keep staring at the dot. I'm going to change it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And then let your eyes drift off the dot. Right? Now, you may have seen, not always, you may have seen when the slide flipped over, blue sky and green grass. Yes? And maybe some of you may have seen red flags, depending on how much beer you had at lunchtime. Yeah? It's a black and white slide, of course. And what I've done here is I've cheated. I've color accommodated your eye, so that when I move to a black and white slide, your eye struggles to react. And because it expects blue sky and green grass, it actually fills it in. There's some really interesting kind of work on this about how your eye holds black and white information at high resolution and color information at low resolution, and so your brain fills it in. Blue sky, green grass, and red flags. Did anyone see red flags? Red flags at all? Yeah, one red flags. Blue sky, green grass, red flags. Let's do it again. Blue sky, green grass, red flags. Red flags. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Now, what's interesting is not so much that I've tricked you, is your reaction. Your reaction the second time around, did you notice, was far more kind of, oh, yes, you're right. Who saw red flags the second time round? Very many more. Why? Because I told you to expect them. Oh, shit. He got us. I told you to expect them. Yeah, some of you will see. I gave this talk in Lithuania. I get myself into some scrapes, I tell you. And this was Lithuanian vice chancellors. I didn't know that in Lithuania, when you had lunch, you had vodka. And so they had a lot of vodka at lunchtime. This disappeared down. There were several bottles disappeared. Oh, there's a challenge, I tell you. So when I got up to lecture, this group of vice chancellors, they were swaying quite a lot. And I gave a lecture, and we got to this slide, and we did the blue sky, green grass, red flags, and one vice chancellor stuck his hand up. And by the way, this has been translated from Lithuanian to English through a translator, which was very funny, because I said, what do the vice chancellors, the rectors see? And the translation went out, and you could see the translator looking at this guy thinking, I don't want to translate this. I don't want to translate. And I was going, what did he say? What did he say? And he said, the vice chancellor, the rector sees blue sky, green grass, red flags, and he sees soldiers walking across the top there. Did you see soldiers? No. Why was it more powerful second time around? Because I told you to expect it. Oh, what a challenge that is for you. What a challenge that is for you. Because, of course, and you know where I'm going to go here, is that it takes the merest suggestion of expectation to change your thoughts. And actually for your brain to invent, out of nowhere, completely untrue, completely unjustifiable, a thing that you think is true. Red flags. And of course, you do this all the time with men and women. And if you don't believe me, then I'm sorry to say this, you're plain wrong. You're plain wrong. It doesn't matter how fair you say you are, you will make this mistake in judgment. And it will be an egregious one, a significant one, and one that you continue to perform at every single stage. That's not my favorite one, though. My favorite is this one, right? So that's your brain filling in things which are not there. Look at this one. Now, you see the purple dots that are going round, and can you see this little green after image? Stare hard at the cross. It takes about 5 seconds. We really have to stare hard. Yeah, some of you got it, some of you got it. What will happen, you'll stare hard at the cross, and then all of a sudden, the purple dots will just go, they'll vanish. They'll just go. They'll just go. How on earth does that happen? And that happens because of the following. If you walk into a room, and this can be a perfect example, you immediately scan everybody's faces, and you assess the person who's most important. Right? And you think, okay, this person's the most important, and then your brain simply deletes all the unimportant people, forgive me, unimportant people around. In fact, to a point where it doesn't hear them, doesn't see them. They can speak up and say, I've got a point, listen to me. You silly Englishman, listen to me. And the brain simply will not hear it. Now I'm going to say this. This is so well understood from social science, and so not understood in the outside world. It still beggars belief, but it goes as follows. If you're in a meeting, let's say there are 20 people there. It's a mixture of men and women, and there'll be a debate, and then a woman will say, wait a minute, I have an idea. Let's do Swexit. Let's leave the European Union. Oh no, you're already out, aren't you? Let's get rid of England, whatever it may be. That idea will be ignored, almost certainly. But we're still 5 or 10 minutes later, and you can time it. Someone else, a man, will say, wow, I've got an idea. Let's get rid of England. The meeting will stop, bodily turn towards the man and say the following, what a good idea. And you, like every single audience around the world I've spoken to, have had exactly the same reaction to that as everywhere else, and that is that pretty much all the women nod, and all the men look at me going, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I wish we could have videoed the audience there. Because the majority of women were simply nodding at me, and the majority of men were just going, Paul, I don't know what planet you're on. How interesting. Why is that important? It's important because of this. It's known as the accumulation of disadvantage. It's well understood. Because every time the woman's ignored, and this is just one example of the multiple disadvantages that women face in the workplace every single day of their lives, come on, let's get a grip of it, perpetuated by her expectations. Every single time a woman's ignored, she sits there and thinks, whoa, wait a minute. That was my idea. What do? Do I keep quiet and let it go? which, by the way, is the choice of most women. I'm sorry to say that. Or does she bang the desk and say, hey, man, no, hey, evil man, that was my idea, let me have it, and appear like a man, behavior-wise. Both ways, she gets, her colleagues are thinking, no, that's not, you don't do that, that's bad. Both ways, she receives down credit in the eyes of her colleagues. Both ways, she loses. I'm sorry to dismay you, but it's true. Let's get a fact, let's get a grip. The evidence is this, that if you pursue that, if that continues, and it will, and now you watch for it, you'll see it at every single turn. After 7 years, that adds up to substantive differences in promotion, pay, advancement, career opportunities, thoughts about ambition, family, you name it. And don't tell me that women make free choices about staying, looking after the kids at home. Women make choices because the place of work can be so discouraging and so disadvantaging because of the day-to-day disadvantages that they face on average. It's not a woman's problem. Oops. I won't do that. So this is what unconscious bias is about, and the antidotes to it are as follows, is that heads of schools, heads of department in particular, I know some are here today, are aware of this, use the opportunity to correct for it and say, oh, no, wait a minute, that idea was had earlier. Evil man, you can't have it, right? And be aware of it and use the opportunities at every single point to turn that over. It doesn't work. That's the advice you'll get, it doesn't work. Let me give you an example. And the reason it doesn't work is that we can't easily work against our unconscious biases. We don't have the brain capacity to continue to think about it. And so what happens is you can tell people about unconscious bias, and they will wrestle with it for a maximum of about 30 minutes. Right? They can think, oh, no, Paul said this. Don't be silly. Think this. And eventually our poor little brains, because they are small, get tired. And then the evidence is it gets worse after that. People forget, and they're worse. And it's exacerbated by, it's not on here, sorry. Tiredness, stress, and hunger. Maybe it's on the next slide. No, I'll do it in a second. It's exacerbated by tiredness, stress, and hunger. And if you're on the heart drug propranolol, which some of you will be, that is also known to exacerbate unconscious bias. We have seen exactly this effect at York. Let me give you an example. This will shock you. We were shortlisting for an academic position in chemistry, junior faculty position. I remember the pile of resumes. 2 or 3 resumes in, there was a guy. He had 26 publications at the age of 30 or so. Amazing record. The debate went as follows. Amazing record. What a wonderful guy. Must be a leader in his field. Fantastic CV. Let's shortlist. The resume was picked up and it was dropped on the shortlist pile. 3 applications later, woman, same age, roughly the same age, had 25 publications. Fantastic record. How did the conversation go? It went as follows. Fantastic record, great publications, obviously doing really well in her field. What a fantastic achievement. The chair of my department picked up the CV, hovered it over the shortlist pile, and someone said, oh, wait a minute, she must have had some help. She must have had some help. That was alarming enough by itself. But what was more alarming is that my colleagues went, oh, yeah, maybe she did. Why was that said? Why wasn't it checked? Why did my colleagues agree? Well, you know why. I've explained to you why. Is that people instinctively don't believe that that's possible and therefore perpetuate that in what they say. This is despite unconscious bias training. So now, and this actually, by the way, I'm going to advocate to you strongly as a very powerful intervention. Now, on all groups which discuss men and women, promotion, pay, dismissal, you name it, I don't know, there's an unconscious bias observer. Moreover, that unconscious bias observer is someone who's of authority in the university, usually an ex-head of department or an ex-manager. Very, very interesting use of these people. Their job is to watch and to say to their colleagues afterwards, this happened, or that happened. And we do it in 2 ways, by the way. I should tell you how we time the amount of time that we speak about male and female, let's say, candidates. We find that we speak about male candidates 50% more than female candidates. Yeah? We also record the number of positive and negative comments made for female and male candidates. Female candidates, and I'm sorry to say this, receive twice as many negative comments than male candidates. They receive roughly the same number of positive comments. Here's my challenge to you. Put on your academic selection committees a person whose simple job, and this should be an academic who does this, is to watch their colleagues for unconscious bias. And be amazed at the difference that makes. I gave a lecture in Norway. I'll tell you a story. I gave a lecture in Norway to a bunch of quantum physicists. Not my idea of a good night out. But my talk was about gender equality. Forgive me, quantum physicists, I know you're in the audience. I'm close to one myself. My talk was this one, but at the end of the day, at this conference. And as you're already realizing, I go on far too long when I talk. So, oh, that's embarrassing. Let me just turn that off. Yep, okay. It's my mother. That's not good. For all sorts of reasons. So I gave this talk to and it was the end of the day, and so I was going on a bit too late. I gave this talk, but I remember in the talk there was a guy sitting just down there on the left, and throughout my talk he was shaking his head like this, going, no, 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 no. And I thought, in trouble here. My host stood up at the end of my talk, and she said, are there any, and even because she got the word question out, this guy's hand was up. It turns out his name was Per. She turned around to Per and said, Per, do you have a question? And he said, yes, I do. It's not a question, it's more a statement. He said, how dare you, this is to me, how dare you come to Norway and tell us about equality? How dare you? We're the most progressive country in the world. And moreover this, I have never made an unfair decision in my life. I follow all the policies, I follow all the procedures, I think about things carefully, I'm aware of unconscious bias, I am fair. I went, okay, right, let's debate this. He says, no. He says, I refuse you. So we didn't get very far. Now, because I'd gone on too long, people at the back had arrived and were waiting to pick up people to take them home, including his wife. His wife heard this debate. Yeah, you can tell he slept in the shed this evening, can't you? Heard this debate. Now, the rest of the story was passed to me secondhand. On the way home, they were driving home, and he was probably still steaming about me, that stupid Englishman, blah, 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 blah. Apparently his wife said, Per, I have something to tell you. That conversation you had with Paul, I'm afraid to tell you that you're the most biased, unfair man that I know. Bad evening for him. And to be fair to him, he had a moment of epiphany. And this happens quite a lot, actually. People have moments of epiphany about this, and I've had several examples of people in tears, usually men, interestingly enough, who suddenly think, oh my God, I'm not fair. And to be fair to him, he wrote to me afterwards and said, I'm sorry, this was clearly wrong. The question is, are you fair? Can you really claim the defense that you're fair? You'll see this a lot. And the answer is no. Let me show you some examples of why. You'll be familiar with this study, published in Sex Roles, 2007. I wish I could publish in that journal, of adjectives used in letters of reference for candidates going for a job somewhere. And you find that women are described as meticulous, hardworking, conscientious, dependable. The same ability of man's described as extraordinary, fabulous, wonderful, exceptional, genius, terrific. So there's already a bias there, right? And, which candidate will you be tempted to appoint? But this. There's no reason on earth now that you can't do the same with the letters that you write. What's it called? Is it called Word Doodle on Google or something like that? You can put in your letters and it'll do one of these things for you. One of the Wordling. Thank you very much. Wordling. I did this with the letters I've wrote over 20 years, and I have to say I cried. I don't mind admitting to you I cried because I did exactly the same. I'd go and talk about gender equality. So who would you appoint in this apparently fair competition? Who would you appoint? Well, you'd be tempted to appoint the man despite the fact they're of equal ability. What about this one? RateMyProfessor.com. Not a website I like to visit. Professor Walton knows where he's talking about, but the rest of us don't, is my favorite comment about my teaching ability, or lack of it. RatingMyProfessor.com is interesting because it has collected multiple data sets over multiple years, over multiple subjects, about students' evaluations of their teachers, right? and have put a normalized score there. The normalized scores for women are in orange. The normalized scores for men are in blue. The subjects are up the left here. There's chemistry up there at the top. You notice in every single case, let me say that again, every single case, students undervalue their women teachers over their male teachers. For the same reasons we've been discussing later, is unconscious bias. Well, I don't know about Chalmers University, but we used uncorrected scores of teaching ability from our students in promotion applications. So what our students say about our staff is used directly to decide whether someone goes from assistant to associate professor. We don't correct for student bias, do you? Because you should. Otherwise, it's not fair. It's not fair. And let me say this. When people say it's not fair, what they fail to recognize is you may well have policies and procedures in place, but they don't recognize the debt of disadvantage that is associated with being a woman. And actually, the better policies and the better procedures will do that. What's the answer? You focus on quality rather than quantity. You're aware of the differences that when they could occur, particularly in large data sets like this. Please do that. That makes a difference. So yes, the two solutions there. Aim for quality over quantity. By the way, what does that mean? It means that you ask for, when it comes to promotion in particular, you ask for a member of staff to present a small number of their highest quality publications rather than a full list of publications that they've done. Why? Because male advantage is always associated with quantity-based measures. Move away from quantity-based measures. Size of grants, size of PhD student group, number of publications. That is always male-dominated. Move to quality-based measures. Very quickly, it's not our problem. It's very interesting. Until about 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't have an evidence base to address this. What's this accusation? Why should we be interested? Why does it make what we do better as a university? There was lots of evidence out there. If you had gender-balanced boards in an industry, your company did better, right? But there was nothing in academia to say that what we do would be better. Well, frankly, now the evidence has arrived, and it's coming back and it's saying one very clear thing, is this is the academic body, if we do not work in diverse groups, men and women, race, all sorts of other dimensions, we will do poorer academia, publications, teaching, research, you name it, than if we did work in diverse groups. Think about that for a second. Think about it. If there's one thing as a university that we want, is to do better academia, to have better publications, have better research, is do better teaching. One of the best evidence ways forward to achieve that is to work in diverse teams. Why wouldn't we do that? There's this study done in Nature. You should look it up. Strength and Diversity. It's a stunning expose of how lack of diversity, lack of gender diversity and racial diversity is harming universities. And we all compete in this big wide world, don't we? Chalmers, York, you name it. What advantages can we bring to ourselves which will make us better universities? This is one of them. There's a very recent paper. I'll just bring it's called, in 2017, President National Academy of Sciences. Gender diversity leads to better science. Very good study, showing that there's now a direct causal link. Yeah? This is a picture out of the paper, I won't label it, but other than to say this here, that's about critical mass. I'm often asked, what fraction of women should you have on committees or groups, or what minimum level of representation do you need so that body of underrepresented people gets some representation? And now we have an answer. It's between 15 and 30%. Let's call it 25%. So if you have committees or groups which have less than that, or departments, Department of Electronic Engineering maybe, that has less than 25% women, that underrepresented group will struggle to make itself heard. It is, I'm going to say this, it is a minimum target which you should achieve for the fraction of women in any single unit. A minimum target, hard target. I didn't say that until the beginning of this year, but now the evidence base is clear on that. It's clear. Use the evidence base, make better use of part-time working, change the promotion criteria. These are the bits of advice I would lend to you that we have found work. I should say, what does work? I'll just take the chemistry department at York as an example. When I arrived in 1993, out of 50 academic staff, we had 2 women. 2. Shortly after my arrival, both those women left. I don't think the 2 are linked, but nonetheless that happened. We had 0 women. I looked and said, this is unacceptable. We have to do something about it. So 25 years later, where are we? We have about, now get this right, 40% academic staff, female academic staff, and 25% of those are at the highest levels. So it does work. You can make a difference. It takes a while, mind. Last thing, then very quickly, the Trump effect. You may have heard of this, microaggressions. Microaggressions is a debate that's live and very challenging in the US, on US university campuses at the moment. What's a microaggression? A microaggression is something where you make an assumption about someone, but then benignly perpetuate that. So for instance, you can't see these very easily. This one here, this guy was asked, do you play basketball? By someone. Yeah? You're not really black, though. You dress nice for a black girl. So these masquerade as compliments, but actually are, the person who's saying this is actually signaling that there is a difference. I saw a very interesting one in York recently. There was a Chinese guy, a Chinese Asian-looking guy walking down the street, and a group of my friends went up to him and said, "Ni hao," Chinese for hello. And he turned to me and said, "I come from Yorkshire." He said, "You insult me by saying that." And that's a microaggression. Now, by the way, people have different reactions to this kind of microaggression kind of terminology. The evidence base is that these little comments, even though they're meant kindly, do make a difference, and we should do our best to iron them out, even though they're small, right? Even though they're small. But that's not the problem. The problem has been the reaction to the microaggressions. Is that people are saying this. It's become too politically correct. Our campuses are becoming, they're saying you can't, we don't say anything anymore, right? And the results of that is that the debate about microaggressions, people have used to then discourage us to suppress unpopular speech, foster a culture of political correctness, perpetuate a victim culture amongst aggrieved individuals, and contributes rather than ameliorates racial tensions in doing the opposite to what the whole debate's about. And what's it is this? It's this, that people are saying the whole equality debate has gone too far. Stop it. This is the most recent resistance. We've had this at York. It's been really nasty, actually. The way it came up at York is interesting. People say, well, with this gender equality business, it's gone too far. Why? Because men don't access mental health services as much as women. Yeah, no, I tell you, it's right. And that may be true in this country, I don't know. But that was used to stop the whole debate. Now, the social scientists are just getting on top of this, and they're saying it's this, and I'm going to equip you with it. They're saying that people who say that it's gone too far are making what's called an argument from adverse consequences fallacy. Oh, what's that mean? It means they take a small part of the argument and then extrapolate it over the whole thing. Yes? And as a result, undermine the whole debate. And I would call it the Trump effect because it's licensed by Donald Trump. If you see the things he says, they take narrow slivers of any situation and then extrapolate it all over to bring down the whole debate. Be aware of it. If you don't already have it, it will come. And the answer is to widen the debate, is to keep the debate alive, is to allow people their mistakes, but to keep talking about it. I put this last bit in. But Paul, I get this a lot. Surely this doesn't happen in universities, academic. We're all grown-ups, we're all very sensible. Let me just share with you one final story, then I'll shut up. Angewandte Chemie is a chemistry journal which is at the highest possible level, right? If you publish in Angewandte Chemie as a chemistry journal, that's a good day. You can go to your head department and say, look at this, promote me, right? I think I've got one publication in my whole career in Angewandte Chemie. One wet Sunday afternoon, 3 years ago, I went through Angewandte Chemie because Angewandte Chemie highlights particular authors that publish in its journals, right? And puts pictures of them up. And and I looked at all these pictures and I categorized them as male and female. And you notice from there that the majority of people they're highlighting are white, male, middle-aged, well, there you go. what are the fraction of women, women that they featured compared to the fraction of women in the whole academic community? In other words, was this a fair representation of women in society, in the chemical academic body? So I did some sums. So the author profiles, they total 51, and out of those, 2 were women. 2 represented a shocking 3.9%. This is the journal. Out of the prize winners, they represented 10% of women. And of all the people they featured, only 10% of them were women. Compared in chemistry, I showed you the data, about 30% overall. So in other words, the journal was constantly underrepresenting the achievements of women. Constantly. This is one of the journals to get into in chemistry. So what did I do? I wrote to the editor. Dear editor, angry from York. I submitted as a paper. I think my mistake actually was calling the title of the paper was Angewandte Chemie's Sexism. I don't think that helped very much. Anyway, the paper I submitted with all these data in it was, I wrote it pretty quickly. Was rejected immediately, straight off the editor's desk, a guy called Peter Gurley's, straight off his desk. That's not the issue. The issue that came back was what he said. And this is in the rejection letter. Dear Paul, blah, blah, blah. If we were to include more women, then we would have to have a different set of selection criteria for men and women. Verbatim, word for word. Now, let me remind you, this is one of the top chemistry journals in the world. This is one of the key stakeholders in determining who gets in and out of the journal. And he genuinely believes that men and women are different. They're different. That women are weaker than men. And if you don't believe that we're vulnerable to gender equality, deep gender equality in universities, then I'm afraid you're mistaken.
But wait a second. The statement that men and women are different is not the same as the statement that women are equal to men. You are extrapolating from what you say.
Yes, I think I can understand why you say that, but I would urge you to think about the following. What led him to make this statement? Yeah. Yeah. I would say I agree with you, and you can always pick holes of where the causal line exists in these arguments. But whenever something comes up which purports to extract out differences between men and women, where there's different selection criteria or different appearances in the journal, one has to question the assumptions behind that. And it may well be that the assumptions are not quite what I say, but they may well be they are what I say. What a social scientist would say to you is that you can never link one to the other, but when you see repeated incidences of separations of the questioning of ability of women and men, then that's likely to be rooted in the things that I've said. But thank you for your comment. Thank you. So the recipe for one is this for a university. Share data widely and openly. Leadership, I should say, is key, particularly not at rector level, although that's important, but particularly at head of department level. Why? Because that's where cultural change happens. Yeah, that's the advice. Focus at department school level. Learn the social science research. Google's on your side there. Use external catalysts. It's great that people from outside come to talk to you about it. We have a scheme called Athena Swan. It's a national scheme in Britain, which gives awards to departments for achievement on gender equality. That's been very powerful. And lastly, keep the debate live. Equip yourself with some of these fancier theories of argument. And I'm sorry I've gone on too long, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this excellent lecture. There is time for questions and discussion, I think. So we have a microphone here if there are questions. Please.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I have a quick question concerning your suggestion that we should have observers during decision making, for example, on promotions. So, does it matter? Have there been any indications that it matters whether the observer is male or female,
right.
Or is it actually the level of where they are, for example, professionally, that decides what they find?
Right. Thank you for your question. From our experience, the more important thing to do is the level of experience that they have, and whether they carry the authority of argument, usually associated with the authority of position, to persuade that their colleagues that they're making a mistake in their judgment. They see the same things regardless of gender, yes, yes.
And we have
There's one here, the gentleman there. There's a gentleman in the red jumper.
Yeah, so thanks. I heard most of the talk before because there's something on YouTube, right? From Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I actually have I'd have a lot of questions about the content of your talk, but since other people want to ask questions, I'll limit it to 1 or 1.5 questions.
Sure.
One specific thing is, I'd just like you to comment maybe, when you said the Trump effect, I think it would be more interesting, for example, to discuss, say, the Jordan Peterson effect.
Yes.
If you just discuss that. But then I have a more fundamental question, which I don't think you addressed at all, and which it wasn't addressed either in the talk I saw on YouTube, and neither is it addressed in the title of the seminar, namely, I think this question needs to be addressed sort of before anything else, because it's the most fundamental question, namely, what does one mean by equality?
Yeah.
And specifically, there are 2 fundamentally different interpretations of equality, namely equality of opportunity and equality of outcome.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by equality?
Yeah, I mean more the latter, equality of outcome. The equality of opportunity, you'll notice I addressed, albeit tacitly, in what I call the debtor disadvantage that women face, is that if you provide a group of people with equality of opportunity at the point of assessment, whatever it may be, and that makes an assessment on the person in front of them, regardless of knowledge of their history, then that will disfavour women over men. Why? Because women face disadvantage up to that point.
Okay, but you agree if we talk about evidence, right? So there's a lot of evidence that equality of outcome leads to totalitarian societies which are completely dysfunctional, whereas equality of opportunity leads to well-functioning free societies.
Yeah.
For example, like the one in which we actually live.
Yeah. So I can't comment on that because I'm not aware of that research base. If indeed
Look at history.
If indeed that is the consequence of
you are willing to actually discriminate against individuals in order to achieve your ideological objective, which is equality of outcome.
It is not clear, and you see this difference between countries about whether you have to take positive discrimination steps. I think that's what you're describing, against provision of equal opportunity.
I'm talking about a specific situation. Are you just say a specific situation where you have, say, 2 applicants for a position, and say that everybody agrees that the male applicant is better than the female applicant, but it's decided that we need to employ a certain percent of females, blah blah blah. So we're going to take the female applicant.
Yeah. So as I was saying, you're asking me if by taking that, and if I do it with my hands, the lower ranked female applicant in an assessment, that we take the woman over the man because we haven't recognised the debt of disadvantage that the woman will have faced on average throughout her career. Is that your question?
No, I'm asking. I'm not asking for any motivation. I'm just asking, is it conceivable that in that? It's. My point is really that you cannot reduce this to a question of evidence. I believe there is an ideological bedrock here.
Yeah.
And people do have different viewpoints.
Yes.
That is why you meet resistance, because people realize that you do have an ideological objective which they don't agree with, right? And the evidence is always you get some evidence in one direction, some evidence in another direction.
Yeah, let me be plain. My objective, and you're right to challenge me on this. My objective is to, and you can take the leaky pipeline pots as a good, is 50-50 across the board. That's my objective. Why? Because the evidence is that if you achieve that within certainly the operations that we work in, the evidence is that you lead to better science, better productivity within academia. Now, you're asking a wider question whether that is ideologically sound across society. I don't know, and you're calling on bits of research which purport to say that's the case. I don't believe there is such a monopoly of wisdom. When I talk to social scientists about this, the answers that come back for exactly that question are varied. So I'm not certain that you call on an evidence base which does receive unanimous support across the sociologists. However, what you do receive a unanimous support for is the effect of equality measures, and let's say against the outcome of 50-50, as it pertains to the academic body in which we all work. And you can stretch the argument as far as you want. The further you stretch the argument, the more uncertain you have to be in what you say.
Okay, I think I understand your position. Can you comment on the Jordan Peterson effect?
Are you talking about Helen Peterson?
No, Jordan Peterson.
No, I'm not aware of this, I'm sorry.
I would recommend looking up.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. I know, folks, that sometimes these questions can get a little bit debated, but these are really important and valid questions. So thank you.
Yes, hello. I just wonder, a sometimes used reason for employing not as many women is that women aren't that used of the marketing of yourself. Do you believe that is a false reason, that is just expressed as a convenient...
So is it, sorry, if I rephrase your question, just see if I've got it right, is that women don't sell themselves as effectively as men when it comes to presenting?
Yeah.
The answer is that, yes, if you look at the way that men and women present themselves, there's good evidence to say that women won't present themselves as fully or as men will. Why? The reason for it is this, is that men are prepared to take risks because they don't receive the penalty of that risk being uncovered as much as women do. So for instance, if you look at a job description which lists the following criteria for men and women, women typically go through each single one and say, do I meet that, do I meet that, do I meet that, do I meet that? And if they come across a no, will then not apply. Whereas men will go, yes, yes, no, but I can take a risk on that. Why? Because if they've found out, the penalty that they pay is far less than that of a woman. If you find out that a man has taken a risk on something that he shouldn't have done, your opinion will be, well, actually, that's good because we want risk takers. Yeah? And that shows a bit of leadership. Whereas a woman, you'll think, no, we don't want that. And men know that, and women know that as well. The microphone.
Hello.
Sorry, there you go.
Yeah, thank you for an interesting talk. I'd like you to reflect on this afternoon's audience.
Yes. Well, yes, and this is typical, is that there's the audience representation here, men and women, it will be different to the academic, or the body of the university. Typically, it's more women. What I wish I could have done is for us to have videoed your reaction to what I've said. And the reason is that you will find affirmation in the faces of what I've said, find affirmation of what I say in the faces of women typically, and not of men. I reflected this a little bit to you. So not necessarily the makeup of the audience, but the reaction to it. The other question to ask is this: does this body of people here represent the whole body in terms of their expectations? They say they are ideological values. And the answer is probably not. You probably represent the group of people who are already motivated both emotionally and practically towards understanding gender equality. And that's why many of the women are here, because they may well be motivated for reasons which are perhaps, I won't call them negative, but they've experienced bits in their life. It is true to say that when I speak to a diverse audience, what I mean by diverse is the Vice Chancellor's usually told them to be there, is there's a good fraction, about 10%, who simply refuse to acknowledge what I've said. Now, I have nothing against that, because clearly there are arguments one way or another. But it is likely that our audience in front of us does not contain that fraction of people. So am I preaching to the converted? Probably. Oh, sorry, yes.
So, talking about risk, now you explained some difference between men and women.
Yes.
So if that is true,
yes,
and if another statement would be that if we want to have an excellent university,
yes,
or prestigious, maybe, and that involves having high risk quality, does that mean that we are doomed to failure?
No.
Or do we need to change the system?
Well, you characterize it in terms of doomed to failure and full-on success. I would say we all sit somewhere in the middle between complete failure and complete success. The question is, can you add, if this is a spectrum, can you edge more towards success, given that you and the rest of us have to compete in the wider world with all their achievements? My comment is this, is that the measures we associate normally with success in a university, let's say quality publications or grant income or student feedback, are closely associated and indeed correlated with gender equality work, as the evidence base has shown. And so if one uses those dimensions as a measurement of whether we're successful or a failure, then one would do well to listen to what the equality literature is telling you about how equality is associated with progress against those parameters. Is it causal? Is it that if I perform equality practice, that leads to better academia? I think you find that most commentators wouldn't go that far. The reason it's very difficult to make that causal association. However, there's no evidence the other way round. No, let me put it this way. There's no evidence to say that if you pursue equality measures, you go the other way towards failure. So I think what I'm saying is that if you don't follow equality practice, it's likely that other places will overtake along the measures that I've just mentioned. And if you're concerned about those measures, that equality is one good way of making progress against them. Bottom line is this: it comes in the Nature paper. You know, the problems that we face, let me just say societally or kind of academically, or the research challenges we face, are so complex, so difficult, so challenging, that one good way of addressing them is to have a diversity of opinion. And you can call that, characterize that any way you like: diverse teams, diverse thinking, interdisciplinarity. But that's what I think I've seen without exception now, is that the things that we're interested in, particularly these big research problems, benefit most from diverse thinking, part of which is gender equality.
Is there a difference how successful equality work can be based on how many men that engage in it? That is, do you need a critical mass of men to engage in it? Because as you acknowledged,
Right.
there are more women in general that tend to engage in these questions.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm trying to recall an evidence base which would speak to it. I can lend you some anecdotes, and that is, it's interesting, isn't it, that when you look at the equality world, there have been many people, many women over many years, particularly in women's studies departments, that have said the same things that I'm saying, both in the evidence base, both in literature, and both in public speaking. But they have failed to gain traction in the consciousness of universities and society. And it's interesting that a man, me, and others suddenly get listened to. And by dint of that, and that anecdote alone, one would affirm your argument that men need to be involved in pushing forward the debate, at very least, unfortunately. Unfortunately, because people previous to me should have been recognized for this.
Could you comment on quota?
Quota. Yeah. So quota, the question was, could I comment on quota? And quota, if I understand it, is you fix a target to achieve by a particular point. And some commentators in the equality world would say quotas and only quotas are a thing to get a system to shift. My view on this is that, and having read what's out there, is that there's a mixture of opinions from the social scientists. And people impose, and impose is perhaps the right word, quotas where everything else has failed. So we've tried equal opportunity, we've tried disadvantage, we've tried interventions, and all of those failed. Is at that point quotas, we want 50% of women by a certain date, what people use. You might be interested to know that in Ireland, the university system there has gone to something called cascade quotas, and it goes as follows. If you take the particular fractions of females at particular grades, let's say assistant, associate, and full professor, and there's 40% women at assistant professor, that the promotion rounds that year have to reflect that percentage of the cohort below, so they have to be at 40%. And that's now a nationwide quota, for want of a better word. We will see if it works. It's an experiment. In some countries, quotas are illegal. I don't know what it's like here in Sweden. In the UK, quotas are right on the edge of the law. Oh, there's one here.
How come you choose to do research in this subject?
Yeah, well, so I'm not a researcher in this subject. I'm just a kind of practitioner. But I will lend to you from a different point of view, and that is there are two distinct effects we have seen certainly at York, which are associated with equality. One is the gender balance of the people we work with. That's certainly right, and their ability to produce things. The second thing is this, and I mentioned this at lunchtime, is our profile as a university. And whilst this may sound like naked ambition, we have gained a reputation to attract the best talent we simply would not be able to achieve otherwise. Because we say we're a progressive university, a progressive department that values both men and women. That has allowed us to attract people, talent from places, both men and women, particularly women, from places we never gotten before, and especially North America. So now we get postdocs and students from North America who come because, one, good university department, two, they select York above all the other places because of our gender equality practice. That has been to our enormous benefit.